All right, shalom, everyone. I'm Brother Doug. Welcome, everyone. Today, for us, for our fellowship anyway, is I believe we will be going into the start of um, our last day of unleavened bread later tonight. So I believe we are, or no, not tonight. I think tomorrow night. My bad. I think we're actually on day 6 tonight, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me, someone, if I'm wrong. But we're going to be starting actually day 6 later this evening of our feast of unleavened bread. So I hope everyone's having a great feast season. And this is going to be a study called Resurrection in the Tanakh. So this is aka the Old Testament. So we're going to find verses here in the Old Testament that foreshadow Yahusha's resurrection and our resurrection when we will be given new bodies, heavenly bodies. So this is a real tube study to know of and to understand, because this kind of piggybacks off of other topics. Like understanding this topic, in my opinion, will help you understand topics like, are angels just outer bodied spirits in heaven? Do they have physical bodies? Because remember, Yahusha in Matthew 24 said that we will be like the messengers in heaven. So something about our physical form with our resurrected bodies will be similar to the messengers. So this is why it all ties in, because you see a lot of people in Christianity. I'm not going to waste too much time on this side topic, but you'll see a lot of people in Christianity, they'll quote Matthew 24, say, well, see, Yahusha said angels can't mate with women. Well, the word there is that they don't, not that they can't.
That's right.
So actually, in scripture, you'll see that messengers have physical bodies. A lot of times when they're in visions and stuff, like Gabriel is described with a physical body. He's got brass feet or this or that. He looks similar to a man. Like messengers, even in heaven, have almost like a man-like appearance. But they're glorified. They're esteemed bodies. So, like, the 4 living creatures, for example, right? The cherubs, the 4 living creatures in Ezekiel, right? It talks about one had a head like a man. One of the heads was like a man's head, had a head of an ox, this and that. They have a physical body, the cherubs. Physical body. So a lot of people have been taught in the church, oh, well, angels are just outer bodied spirits. They're just spirits. They don't have no body. That's completely unbiblical to say that messengers don't have bodies. It's completely unbiblical. And you'll see in your own personal studies, we don't have time today to go into every instance of that, but you'll see in your own studies, if you read the scriptures for yourself, they are described in every vision as having some type of body. They're not just like little ghosts out in the sky. That's not how they're described. That's how culture has gotten us to think of messengers and all that. But anyway, sorry for, tangent there. But anyway, Psalm 16, verses 8 to 11, we're going to start at with resurrection in the Tanakh. So, let's see here. So Psalm 16, 8 to 11. Mom, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I have set Yahuwah always before me, because he is at my right hand. I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to Sheol, nor will you let your set apart one see decay. You have made known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand.
Okay, so I think where we see it here, right? It says you will not let your set apart one see corruption, right? So what is this actually talking about? This is talking about when Yahusha dies, right? This is fulfilled. He's in the grave for 3 days, right? And he resurrects. So Yahuwah did not let his body see corruption. And a lot of people get confused about this. Yahusha did not have a esteemed body, or if you prefer, a glorified body when he first resurrected.
Right.
He didn't see the Father yet. He didn't go up to the Father yet. So a lot of people get confused and they don't fully understand why it says in the text, "Don't touch me. I haven't gone up to my Father yet." The reason why is he's still in that corpsey body. He's still in that old body, human body. He didn't get his resurrected body yet until he ascended. When the messenger says, just as you saw him ascend, he will descend the same way and all that. Once he got into heaven, that's when he has an esteemed body. And that's, how we know. Revelations chapter 2 and 3 talks about him having burnt brass, like metal, as his like skin. And like he's got, eyes of flame of fire. No human being has fire in their eyes. Okay. So he's almost having like a celestial, what you would call it? A celestial, in the vision that John sees, he's seen like Yahusha in his celestial form. Not that he's an angel or anything, but that like he's in his heavenly image now. He's no longer a human. So he's put off corruption, put on incorruption, so on and so forth. So, but this is a prophecy right here. What my mom just read. You will not suffer your set apart one to see corruption, meaning Yahusha never saw his body decay. He after 3 days, he was brought back to life. He brought himself back to life. So I believe that's what Psalm 16:10 is alluding to. Very early in the Tanakh there, we have the resurrection being mentioned. Oh man, ankle's hurting a little bit today. Okay. Let's see. We got Psalms 71 verse 20. Let me get there real quick. And let me know if anyone wants to read. Feel free.
Yeah, I can read.
Okay, sis. You want to read Psalm 71 verse 20 for us?
Yeah.
Okay. Here. Right. There we go.
'71 verse 20.
Yeah.
Okay. What afflictions many what afflictions many and I can't see that.
Sore. Let me there should be a way to increase the font here. Hold on.
Yeah, it's kind of okay.
Let me just get to verse 20 here. Yeah, it kind of messed up when I went zoomed in.
Okay, there. What afflictions many and sore hast thou shewed me, yet thou didn't turn and quicken me, and broughtest me again from the depths of the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those that are like confused with the British English here, so what it's saying here is many sore afflictions have you showed me, showed. That's very old type of English where the O is the E. Yet thou means you did turn and quicken me. Quicken, I think in our modern English would be like revive, bring back to life. You revived me.
Living
and
like the
and
quick and the dead.
broughtest. A lot of the times in the British English, they always add a ST at the end or EST at the end. I don't know what that's about, the Middle English. It's very weird, but it just means he brought me again from the depth of the earth. So like Sheol, hell, Sheol, Hades. It's talking about Daoud prophesying, foreshadowing Yahusha being brought back to life, being brought back from the depth of the earth, like rising him, like, when those that rise from the dead. So this is another verse in Psalm 71 that Sister Marissa read that shows that the resurrection is not just a New Testament idea. This was very well in their mind. And, we'll talk about the historical viewpoints of different groups of the Hebrews around Messiah's time after we read these scriptures. But that's another thing. Even in history, you could see certain groups understood that there had to be a resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees knew this. Sadducees didn't. There was different sects and groups that were divided on it. But yeah, so let's see. I think we're at Job 14, verse 10. And I might read that for us. Job 14:10. All right, 14:10. But a man that has died is utterly gone. So I'm reading from the Brenton's English Septuagint here. No. When a mortal has fallen, he is no more. So when a mortal has fallen, he is no more. So Job, I think at this time period, like early in the text, it seems like he doesn't fully understand the resurrection yet, but you'll see in later chapters of Job that Yahuwah is like showing him like there is a resurrection of the dead. So like this is something that Yahuwah was revealing to the prophets that early in the Tanakh period, like 1600 BC or whatever, they didn't fully understand it. Like I would say the generation of Masha didn't fully comprehend yet what Yahuwah was trying to show them with the resurrection. So let's see here, verses 12 to 14 also in this chapter. Let me just fix the shared screen here. So Job 14, 12 to 14. All right, so it says here, and man that has lain down in the earth shall certainly, so in his opinion, this is Job's opinion at the time, because he doesn't know that there's a resurrection, shall certainly not rise again till the heaven. Now, what's interesting, though, it says, shall not arise again till the heaven be dissolved. So I guess at that point in time, they were under the false notion that they thought the resurrection wasn't going to happen until the new heaven, new earth. Because actually what it's saying here is, till heaven be dissolved, and they shall not wake from their sleep. So in his mind, if it is going to happen, it's not going to happen until the new heaven, new earth. But we see later on with the prophets, Yahuwah shows that that's not the case, that there is a resurrection of the dead before the new heaven, new earth. For oh, that you had kept me in the grave and had hidden me until your wrath should cease. You should set me a time in which you would remember me. For if a man should die, shall he live again, having accomplished the days of his life, and I will wait till I exist again. So we see that Job, in his mind, he doesn't see it possible for someone to be resurrected at this point in his book. But you'll see later on that, Yahuwah kind of changes his mind and shows him that there is a resurrection. Actually, 5 chapters later, if you go to 5 chapters later, Yahuwah shows him that there will be a resurrection. Job 19:25 to 27. Okay, so 19:25 to 27. Hey, Mom, my shared screen timeout. You want to read that for me?
Sure. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see Alua. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. Is that it? Did you want me to read?
Yeah, pretty much the 3 verses there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, you see here in verse 26, pretty much in both versions, you can see the resurrection here. It says the Septuagint says to raise up upon the earth my skin. So meaning raising up from Sheol, raising up upon the ground my skin that endures these sufferings. For these things have been accomplished to me of Yahuwah. So Ayub, I think at this point, Job at this point is now being shown through Yahuwah's Ruach that there is going to be a resurrection of the dead. And probably before that, before Yahuwah is showing him this, a lot of the ancients, like Ayub and all of them, didn't think that there was a resurrection of the dead up until this point. Really, you don't get a full understanding or like a really outright belief of the resurrection in the early books of the Tanakh. You really don't see that up until the prophets like Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. That's where you really see them having a universal belief that there's a resurrection of the dead. Ayub, remember, guys, supposedly it was written very early. It was written very early. And according to Jewish tradition, we don't know if this is a fact or not, but according to Jewish tradition, they put the scribe for Job as Masha. So this is a very early Tanakh book, a lot earlier than a lot of people realize. Like a lot of people think, oh, Job's with the poetic book, so he must be later. No. That was a traditional rendering of where the book of Job is supposed to be. Where if you actually look at even early Hebrew tradition, they believe that either he was a contemporary of Masha's father or of Masha himself. So Job, like his whole story would have taken place like somewhere roughly between Exodus and Numbers, somewhere around there. Because you see in the Septuagint, he's called the king of Edom right before Balak. Balak comes like right after him, if I'm not mistaken. Balak, son of Beor. So he's definitely very early in the story of the Torah, like when he exists, when he lived on the earth. So you get kind of understand why he doesn't initially believe in the resurrection until Yahuwah inspires him to write that, or inspires Masha to write that for him. Like, you know, he'll tell Masha what happened. If that tradition's correct and, you know, he had Masha write it, you know, Masha would have been told what happened. So it would have been like secondhand information. But anyway, so that's the interesting thing. So early on in Ayub and Job, he doesn't fully understand that there's a resurrection. Later on, it seems Yahuwah is showing him that there's a resurrection. So we also have the next one here is Hosea 6:2. After 3 days, he will make us whole. This is the earliest prophecy of Yahusha's suffering and his impalement being in Sheol for 3 days. So this is probably the earliest you see this in the Tanakh. So Hosea chapter 6, verse 2. After 2 days, he will heal us. In the third day, he shall arise, meaning resurrect, and live. And we shall arise and live before him, and shall know him. Now, that's an interesting phrase there. Know him, like be acquainted with him, to personally know someone. So, like, don't we see this moment in Ezekiel and Jeremiah as well, where it talks, or even Paul's letters, right? Where it says, like, when we see him, we shall truly know him when we see him, or we will be as he is physically.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, there's this event in the millennium where a lot of the 144,000, or even the new heaven, new earth, we will finally see Yahusha face to face, a lot of us. And we will see him as he is, not in human form, but as he is.
Not through a veil.
Not through a veil.
That's how Paul describes it.
Yeah. Not a glass dimly.
That's right.
No. So, yeah, I believe that's what it's talking about in Hosea 6 here. So, yeah, Isaiah 26, 14 and 19, if you want to read that, Mom.
Okay. I'm sorry, what verses again?
Isaiah chapter 26, verse 14 and verse 19.
Okay. They are now dead, they live no more. Those departed spirits do not rise, You punished them and brought them to ruin.
Hmm.
You wiped out all memory of them. And then 29.
Departed spirits, huh? Interesting. Interesting. They that's I have to give them credit for translating it that way. Many of the versions don't do that.
You said 29?
No. Verse 14 and 19.
19. I'm sorry.
It's
Got
okay.
confused. All right. Now that is, but your dead will live, their bodies will rise. You who dwell in the dust, wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning. The earth will give birth to her dead.
So when you see the phrase departed spirits, what do you think that's talking about?
I would think the dead departed.
A dead person, yes, but human or something else.
Mm.
So
A
I'll
demon.
show you.
A demon.
It's a demon.
Okay,
It's the Nephilim.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to get you to kind of think about, right, like what demons are. They're
Mhm.
departed spirits of the giants.
Okay, right.
So when it's talking about the departed spirits in the NIV, which thank you, NIV, for translating that correctly. It's not just dead, it's departed spirits. Thank you. Many translations don't do that, and that's what it's supposed to say. It's supposed to say the Rapha, the Raphaim, the departed spirits. So it's showing that they don't have a resurrection. They can't be saved. They don't have a resurrection.
Right.
They don't rise whatsoever. So a lot of people, like, I catch flack for saying this, but this is a proof text, in my opinion. This is proving it that they can't be saved. Okay, it says, they cannot rise or shall not rise. So it's meaning that when Yahuwah has his judgment, there's no resurrection for them, whether resurrection to life or resurrection, like either way, there's no bringing them back to life. So they're basically they're in limbo. Demons are in limbo. Like they're not of his creation. They're not part of the white throne judgment. Most likely they're probably just going to cease to exist when the judgment happens. Yahuwah will extinguish them because they were never meant to exist in the first place. These giants who were of a sinful union, not of Yahuwah. Yahuwah never said to messengers, "Oh, go ahead and procreate with humans." He never said that. So a lot of people, like, I catch flack with this because we get in our emotions and we get like, well, they should be given a fair shot. Not true. If Yahuwah didn't mean to create them, they're not his creation, and they're not part of his plan for creation, for salvation. He says it very clear. He says the seed of the woman. Seed of the woman, meaning Israel is the seed of the woman. Messiah's seed is seed of the woman, not of a hybrid. So I know a lot of people, like, they have a problem with that, but when you understand the Nephilim is literally a transgression of Torah. For them to exist at all is a transgression of Torah. You don't mix the seeds. Okay, you don't put a seed of something else in a seed of something else. So you're talking about a rebellious union that Yahuwah never ever said okay to, of a celestial being with a mortal being. And yeah, go ahead, sis.
Yeah, so in the book of Enoch, it tells us that Enoch went as a intermediary to Yahuwah and asked for those angels who had fallen, and Yahuwah told Enoch to tell them that they have no redemption because of what they. I mean, Enoch tells us that. Ever since back then, when they did that, and they even cursed themselves and said that they're going to do this regardless, and then they turn around and ask for forgiveness, and they asked Enoch to go and ask the Father.
Yeah,
and said no. They have no redemption.
Yep. Those are 2 points, sis. But for those that say they don't accept Enoch, it's right here in the verse we brought up. Isaiah 26:14, they will not rise. They will not rise in the resurrection. They will not. So I know a lot of people think that's mean or unfair. Listen, they did not mean to exist like Sister Marissa was saying. It was not part of Yahuwah's plan. If you do something outside of Yahuwah's will, Yahuwah is not concerned about being fair to something he never wanted to exist. It's not in his will. It wasn't in his will. They rebelled, like Sister Marissa said, the Watchers don't even have forgiveness. They don't have a chance for salvation. So they themselves, by the way, willfully sinned, knew they weren't supposed to do it, were created perfect in heaven. The angels are perfect. They don't have sinful defects like we do. They know what they're doing. So in the context of the book of Enoch, it says that they put a curse on themselves. They were so wicked that they put imprecations and cursed themselves in this oath that they took to sleep with the women. So we should not feel sorry for these messengers.
No.
They did it 120% willful.
Yep.
120%. And Yahuwah in the book of Enoch, just to add, he calls them reprobates. He calls the demons reprobates. You know, he calls them bastards. Okay, he doesn't consider them as part of his creation. So this is where people get confused, and they're like, well, what if someone's born of a Nephilim bloodline? First of all, Yahuwah is not going to cause you to accept him, to accept the good news, or soften your heart if you're of that bloodline. Okay, it's not how Yahuwah works. That's against his character to do that. Okay, most of the people today that are of that bloodline are mostly from like these royal families, these isolated genealogies. A lot of these people, and it's not necessarily just anyone with Rh negative. That's a lie.
No,
that's the biggest conspiracy theory I've seen out there. Rh negative doesn't necessarily mean you're of Nephilim stock. So anyone that says that, you should ask them, give me proof of that. Give me proof of that, because there's tons of regular human people out there that have Rh negative. Go ahead, brother.
Oh, yeah.
Do you believe that one can have, they can be descended from that, right? Let's say descended from a specific tribe that had a lot of Nephilim in them, but they don't necessarily contain Nephilim DNA in and of themselves. Do you believe that Yahuwah can override that, even though they might be from that family, that he can override the DNA so that it's not active in them, but they still have a struggle, not necessarily through the DNA, but through curses on that bloodline?
Are you talking about this day and age, Brother Joshua, or are you talking about back then?
No, I'm talking about in general.
Okay, like I would have to like basically separate, though. Like there's a difference between, like, let's say like Solomon's lineage, right? It got intermarried with them. So there's always a chance that you could have, even though some of Solomon's wives were Nephilim, he had regular human children because of Yahuwah. And like what you're saying. But as far as, like, let's say a giant and a giant procreate together, I could say it could be possible for Yahuwah to do that, but is it inside his will? Probably not. If it's like a straight 100% Nephilim blood, I don't think that's going to happen, because a lot of them are in the occult too. A lot of them, like, there's a difference between, being human and you have that recessive gene from the Nephilim, and that Yahuwah just allows you to bypass it. That's a whole different story between that and, like, let's say like one of the Philistines married a female Philistine, and now you got 100% Nephilim on both sides. I don't think Yahuwah would override that. I think.
Now, Brother Doug, do you think that there is people today in age that have Nephilim in them, like the people that are 6, 7 foot and almost 8 foot tall? Do you think that they have some type of Nephilim bloodline in them?
I guess some could and some couldn't. I don't think the height has anything to do with it. I don't think the height, like, just being 7-8 foot, can I assume that they're part of that bloodline? I don't think every celebrity is part of that bloodline. There's even some people that are not part of that bloodline that get, they get kind of canned, or they get kind of, they're looked at as an outcast, even from the royal family. That some that like that Meghan girl, who's not part of that family, seems to have been, because supposedly she's not part of the royal bloodline, and that's why the queen hated her. So there, I would say it could, but it's not a necessary trait of being 7-8 feet tall. I would say that if you actually do the research and go into the science of the pre-flood world, a lot of us would have been taller if sin never happened, entered the world. Sin kind of affected a lot of things on our genetic scale we kind of don't pay attention to. As far as height, like the number of our height and all that, the reason why a lot of us are not 6 feet tall and all that, it goes back into that when sin entered the world in Genesis 3, it altered the world. It altered a lot of things like oxygen. When you look at the oxygen of the pre-flood world and the post-flood world and what happened with the flood, a lot of things changed. So, it wasn't just our age being a lot less when we die, it's also other things too. I will say this, it's very possible for a normal human to have that recessive chromosome in them, but that doesn't make them a Nephilim.
No.
Like, it just means that it was a possibility that they could have became one when they were born. So like, I really recommend people check out Rob Skiba's, and I might leave the link where he talks about the whole science behind chromosomes and how basically it could be upon the parents' obedience or disobedience that's what causes their children to be Nephilim or not sometimes. Like, we see this with Ham. Ham was super wicked, and he, according to Rob's theory, I'm not saying this is fact, but according to Rob's theory, all 3 sons would have had the same type of wives. So, they would have had no 100% human women from the pre-flood era to procreate with, like Ham, Shem, and Japheth. They would have all had, tainted women to use to procreate. And it seems like Ham, specifically because of his wickedness, he becomes the progenitor of the post-flood giants.
But why would Allah allow these women to be part of those that were saved? I thought he was trying to get rid of all of this Nephilim stuff.
Well, technically, Yahuwah was working at it in stages. I believe the reason he allowed it was because he knew Shem had to have progeny, after the flood. Shem had to have a wife. And the problem is everyone else is dying. The problem is, and actually a lot of people get this confused, the flood was not for the giants. It never says in scripture that it's for the giants. It says that I will cause a flood upon the earth and upon the creatures whom I have made. Yahuwah had a different plan for the giants that would escape the flood and all that. He already had a separate plan. That's why he told his people, listen, I'm about to bring into your inheritance. You're going to find these peoples, the Canaanites, the Amorites, and all of them, utterly wipe them out. A lot of atheists don't understand that, but that's Yahuwah saying, hey, you only got a little bit of them left. Wipe them out. I dealt with it in the pre-flood with them killing one another. You only got a little bit of them left. Wipe them out. And that's really what the plan was. Yahuwah was like, okay, we're going to have the flood. We're going to restart with humanity. There's going to be no more hybrids and all that. There's going to be no more centaurs and all that. His whole creation got corrupted practically.
But then in Genesis 6, it says that before and after the flood, there were still giants.
Yeah. It doesn't say before and after the flood. This is where eisegesis comes in. This is where in assumptions come in. It says in those days and after that. Now, if we believe Enoch is scripture, which I do, Enoch tells you when the first incursion happened. In those days was in the days of Jared, not the days of Noah. So this is where people get confused and they make assumptions. And we've been taught in the church to assume in those days meant the days of Noah, right before the flood. Problem is, according to Enoch, you would not have enough time, if that's the case, to do what Yahuwah did with the watchers right before the flood then. So if you look at the chronology with Genesis 6 and you put it with what Enoch 6 and the Book of the Watchers portion of Enoch says, it makes it very clear that the first incursion was even before Noah's birth. A lot of people don't realize that. It was like all the way in the days of Jared. So you had Jared, and then by the time Noah is probably being born is the second incursion. So the second time they mate with the women would be like when Noah's growing up and all that. And technically, even if you want to believe there's an incursion after the flood, that's fine. But for it to just say the giants were in those days before and after that, that doesn't mean angels had to procreate 2 times either.
Okay,
You
but
could have it just saying,
says in okay, so in verse 13 it said, so Yahuwah said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them.
yeah, people. He's not talking about the giants. He's talking about his creation.
So when he talks about
His creation.
them, is he talking about the ones? Because
He's
it's
talking
just
about
people
humans.
and them.
Like he's talking about people, humans. Like he's not associating Nephilim as the people he's referring to. Because you see in Enoch, he already had a plan for the giants way before the flood happens. He's already got a plan. He had the pre-flood giants, which were super strong, and Greek mythology calls the Titans, as Josephus has been quoted to say. Those pre-flood giants that were a lot stronger and bigger, Yahuwah had them kill one another. So the majority of the giants were killing one another. It was like an all-out war. And Yahuwah punished the watchers by making them watch it. It's
kind of confusing here in verse 4 because it says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward.
Yeah. In the days of the first incursion, when it first happened, and after that. So what I'm trying to say, sis, is we've been taught to assume after that means after the flood. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We've been taught from a eisegetical level, like putting your own interpretation into the text in the church. We've been taught to assume after that means after the flood. When, like, you know what I'm trying to say? So, like, we're making presumptions. It's a presumption at best that it was after the flood. Even if, let's say I'm wrong and there was giants that is talking about giants after the flood, you don't need a second incursion to have giants after the flood. You have giants begetting giants in Numbers 13. So the idea that all it's trying to say in context is there were giants in the pre-flood world that existed in the pre-flood world, and now there's giants afterwards. So if you want to say that it's after the flood, that's fine, but there's no proof there from the verse itself that that there was an incursion after the flood. There would have just been giants after the flood if that's what it's saying. But the idea that there's an incursion after the flood is built on presumption at best. It's built on presumption, and it's debunked once you get to the book of Numbers. Once you get to Numbers 13, it says the Anakim came from the Nephilim, meaning the giants begot other giants. You see what I'm saying? They didn't need angels procreating with human women to get giants. Gigantism is a genetic defect. It's a chromosomal genetic defect, what was happening with the hybrids. So all you have to have is one hybrid mate with another hybrid, and you have more hybrids. Or you would actually have 100% giants, rather than the original giants that were mated with the Genesis 6:2. So Genesis 6 of itself does not tell us when the after that is what I'm trying to say. There's 2 possible views. Is that, in my opinion, is that you either have 2 incursions that happened both in the pre-flood, which I believe personally, in my opinion, before the flood ever happened, or you have an incursion back before the flood, and then there were still giants remaining after the flood, which we see anyway in Genesis later on. Ham begets Canaan. Canaan begets the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites. All of them are from Ham. That's from one lineage. That's all from him, and they're all giants. the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Jebusites. All of them, Yahuwah tells. And to answer your question before, why Yahuwah didn't deal with them with the flood, like I said, in Deuteronomy, you see he's commanding Israel. He's saying, don't leave, don't show mercy, wipe them out. So that's his plan. His plan was the majority of the big pre-flood giants to kill one another. And then whatever's left after the flood, he wanted his people to save for his people a remnant of them to wipe out.
Right.
So maybe the possible reason, I'm just guessing here, spitballing here, is that he wanted Israel to have faith. If Yahuwah did it all for us, where's the faith? If Yahuwah said, "Oh, don't worry about it, guys. I did away with them with the flood."
He could have done that.
How are we going to have faith for him then after the flood happens?
That's right.
Like, because then, all the easy work's done for us. We don't have to do anything.
That's right.
I think Yahuwah allowed a remnant there in the land of Canaan to be like, listen, guys, I'm going to be with you. I'm fighting for you. I'm on your side. I need you guys to wipe them out and take your land. They're living in your land that I'm giving to you. And unfortunately, people don't understand why there's giants in the land, and they just look at it as pagan nations that they were told to kill. It was much more than that. Without understanding what Genesis 6:4 is talking about, you can't understand what Numbers is talking about. Numbers 13, and all these places where Yahuwah is like, these tribes that you're disinheriting, I'm telling you to wipe them out. Don't even leave women and children. But those other nations on the other side of the river, you can spare the women and children. And, that's one of the questions I had coming into this walk. Like, what's the difference? They're both pagans. Both groups are pagans. But one is something that Yahuwah wanted extinguished. The Canaanites, all the giants that came from Ham, Yahuwah was commanding Israel, wipe them out. Because if they did what he told them, you wouldn't have Nephilim at all. If they would have wiped out the Canaanites, the Hittites, and all of them, and did what Yahuwah told them to do, rather than making covenants with them, you would not even have giants today. You would not even have a Nephilim gene today. So Yahuwah had a plan how to get rid of them, but it wasn't what we are assuming that it's with the flood, because the flood was about the corruption of his creation and what he was wiping out. He was starting new. So he was not even focusing really on the giants with the flood. I know a lot of people have assumed that, but the text does not say that. But the text does say that he wanted them to wipe them out after the flood. He wanted them to wipe out and take their land, because it's actually Israel's land. It belongs to Israel. Yahuwah promised it to Abraham. He said, I'm giving that land where the Hittites are, where the Jebusites are. That land will be the land of your seed. And we see that's kind of Yahuwah's plan. But I think one of the reasons is why he didn't do it with the flood. A lot of people ask that, is because it would have been too easy.
That's right.
It would have been too easy for him just to wipe them out all with the flood. And then his people has to do nothing. And then there's no.
That's right.
I think Yahuwah was actually testing Israel's obedience with that. He was saying, listen, if you fully believe in me, that I can do this for you, I can defeat giants for you. I'll be your Elohim, you'll be my people. And that's one of the tests he gave them was, I know they're going to be a bigger, much stronger people, but realize who you have with you, who's on your side. And they failed. And that's why you have giants way up till Solomon's time still in the land. And so that's the best answer I could give, is that was initially what his plan was. As far as the scriptures are concerned, it shows that his plan was to kill them after the flood, to kill what was left, because the majority of the pre-flood giants were killed, according to Enoch, way before the flood. The majority of them killed one another. It was like the all-out civil war that Yahuwah made the Watchers watch, and basically it was to punish the Watchers. It's like, listen, you did this deed, now I'm going to let you see your children kill one another. It was a harsh punishment for the Watchers, because the Watchers did it willingly. They procreated with women willingly and willfully. So, that would be my answer about that. But again, Genesis 6:4, I understand why people think it has to be post flood, but in my opinion, it doesn't have to be. Could it be? Yes, but I would need more. I personally, in my opinion, I would need more proof than, after those days being proof that it was post flood, because they're again, everywhere else we see it, giants are begetting giants. They're just they're procreating with each other. So there's no reason to believe that verse is saying that messengers again went to earth and did what they did the first time. If this is talking about just giants being on the earth after the flood, there's other ways you can have giants. Ham, his whole lineage, and you don't have to believe me on it, but you can look up his whole lineage from Genesis 10 on. His whole lineage is giants, practically. Like the Cush and all of them, they're practically the only, I would say, non-giants that were not born giants in Ham and Cush's lineage, really, that of note is Nimrod. He corrupts himself anyway and becomes a giant, so that doesn't really matter. But just saying, he's the only one that seems to be born not a giant, and the rest, the whole Canaanite lineage is corrupt. The whole, that whole lineage from Canaan is pretty much screwed. Like, so that's what I was trying to say before when Brother Yahushua was asking about, could Yahuwah override that? Yeah, I would say yes. If it's a human, if at least the genetics of that child is at least partly human, I think Yahuwah would and probably override it for the obedience of the parent. But I just don't see that if it's giant with giant. I don't see what would be the purpose for that. If it's giants with giant, those are two creatures that Yahuwah did not want to exist, procreating. So, but let's say like you find out somehow you have the same chromosome in your genetics, but Yahuwah did not allow you to become a Nephilim or whatever. Yeah, I would say that's Yahuwah overriding that chromosome. But as far as like Nephilim mating with other Nephilim, I seriously doubt it. It wouldn't be in you. It's not that Yahuwah can't, it's not in his will for him to cause a human to be born from two giants would not be his will. So, but anyway, so hopefully I tried to answer that to the best of my ability there. Ezekiel 37:7-10, this is talking about the dry bone prophecy and how Israel as a whole, it seems Yahuwah is talking about, or at least I guess Israel, these dead Israelites at that time are being brought back to life. So this is like a type of a resurrection in Ezekiel 37, 7-10. Let me just try to get there. All right, Mom, you want to read that for me?
Okay. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Yahuwah says, come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breathed in, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army.
Wonder if this represents the 144,000 or the multitude, maybe the great multitude that's sitting in heaven in Revelations. Talks about those that have been redeemed among men and all that. I wonder if this is like foreshadowing that, because it says a very great congregation. So this seems like this is like a huge number of people being resurrected. So I kind of wonder. So yeah. But as you see here, this is a concept Ezekiel was familiar with, Isaiah was familiar with. Ayub finally, Yahuwah was like revealing it to him about the resurrection. Daniel is the next one. Chapter 12, verse 2 says that there will be those that rise to eternal life some will rise to eternal shame. And I have here, this is a reference to the white throne judgment in Revelations 20, 11, and 15. So this is like a reference to those that Yahuwah brings back all the dead. This is like the first, not the first, the second resurrection after the millennial. And Yahuwah is bringing to life all the dead, whether righteous or wicked.
Mm-hmm.
And he's judging them out of the books. And those that are not covered by Yahusha are being thrown into the lake of fire. That would be the eternal shame. And some people will say, does this mean eternal punishment, eternal shame? Not exactly. It doesn't have to mean that they're being tortured for forever, and just being burned forever. It just means that they are in shame. They are in, they realize what they lost. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
they realized that, they won't be in Yahuwah's presence. And now they're going to be, going to the second death, as the lake of fire is called, is the second death. So I'm sure there's a time of torture and repayment for what they've done in their lives, but they're not being tortured for forever. They're at some point they're being extinguished in the lake of fire. So you can find that in Revelations, where it talks about the lake of fire is the second death. And I think it even says that those, if I'm not mistaken, it says those that are thrown into the lake of fire, the second death, they're no more. So at some point they cease to exist. After they're tortured for a time. So anyway, let me go now to Daniel 12:2 to show you what I'm talking about, how it is a reference to the great white throne judgment. This is right here. So it says here, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth, Sheol, shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to reproach and everlasting shame. So yeah, the reproach would be like, oh my goodness, we thought we were, going to make it, be in the kingdom, and you're now realizing what awaits you, that you won't have eternal life and all that. So that's probably why it says reproach. And this is another verse talking about what we were talking about earlier. The wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament. And the wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, some of the many righteous as the stars forever. So I understand that it's a metaphor here. It says as the stars, but it's still the concept. That's what we're going to be like. We're not going to be humans floating, in our fleshy, fallen human bodies floating in the air with baby cherubs and all of that. No, it says that you're going to look like the brightness of the firmament. Okay, physically think about that. Your bodies are going to shine like the brightness of the firmament. That's why I mentioned like people thinking that Malachim don't have bodies. Okay, this clearly shows that they do, because we're being compared to them in the resurrection. Okay, brightness of the firmament, wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and some of the many righteous as the stars forever and ever. This is why Yahushua says in Matthew 24, you will be like the angels. So anyway. All right. So we are at, let's see, I think we are at the end here. I think we already talked about Job 19:27, right?
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're at 1 Corinthians 13:12. If you want to read that, Mom, I'll do the 1 John one.
Okay.
So now we're into the Brit now, and how Paul and John and these writers in the Brit Hadashah, how they quote from and pull concepts from the Tanakh and expound upon it about the resurrection here.
1 Corinthians, what, honey? I'm sorry.
13 verse 12.
Okay. Now we see but a poor reflection, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known.
And that verse kind of gets misappropriated, not to attack people that have misappropriated that verse, but that verse is not talking about knowledge of Scripture.
Mhm.
I've seen the church do that, and I'm not trying to attack Christianity, but I'm just saying these are how we put eisegesis in these verses here, or inserting our own view on the text there. The context of knowing part has nothing to do about knowing scripture. It's about knowing who Yahuwah is and knowing what he looks like,
Right.
knowing what Yahusha looks like. We don't know what he looks like in heaven. We only know from what Revelations 2 and 3 say in a vision, mind you, a vision. Okay, so we fully have not seen him face to face. We fully have not experienced him, been physically in our midst. So that's what it means to know in part, or to see in a glass dimly. So, you know, that's what it's talking about in context. So 1 John 3:2, the other one. Beloved, we know we are the children of Elua. No. But it's not yet revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, because we shall see him exactly as he is. So this is talking about basically seeing Yahuwah as he is, Yahusha as he is. And this is like basically seeing him literally face to face. You know, so this would be like when Ezekiel 36, right, talks about no longer will you have to teach your neighbor, your brother or sister to know Yahuwah, to know Yahusha, because we will see him. We will, you know, he will be in front of us. We will be acquainted with him fully. We will know him. Okay, so that's what 1 John 3:2 is talking about. So all this has to do with the resurrection, because this all has to do with truly knowing him and being liking him. And being liking him does not just mean being without sin. It also means physically being like him, being a spiritual, celestial, physical being, not a human mortal being. So everything will go back to the beginning. I always talked about with brothers and sisters what I believe that what Adam and Kua were, we have lost physically, genetically. They were given bodies, I believe, even though the text doesn't literally say it, I believe their original bodies were not mortal, fallen, decaying bodies. They were spiritual, heavenly, physical bodies of light. And we have not had those bodies since the fall. That's why it's saying when we see him, we will be like him. And that's not just spiritually, that's physically. We will be like him. So, yeah. Okay, here. So let me see here. Hebrews 11, 17, and 19. I want to also read as our last cross-reference here. Hebrews 11. No. Hebrews 11, 17. By belief, Abraham, when he was being tried, offered Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, because he reckoned that Yahuwah was able to raise him even from among the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative way. So Abraham understood even back then that there was going to be a resurrection of the dead, or at least understood that it was possible for Yahuwah to raise back up Isaac, to bring him back to life. So this is in the book of Hebrews here. Paul is trying to expound, showing that the concept of the resurrection of the dead is not just some brand new New Testament thing. Okay, so, and I have this last little tidbit here. Paul and our Messiah Yahushua himself are teaching a Hebraic concept of the resurrection, which was well known back then, and is not a new doctrine. 1 Corinthians 15:13 mentions that if we do not believe Yahushua rose from the dead, we have no hope. You can read that, verses 13 to 15 on your own there. Also, verses 50 to 51, I believe, talk about our corruption, human bodies must take on incorruption.
Mhm.
Humans cannot inherit the kingdom. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of Yahuwah. That is literal. You can't enter the kingdom in
Yes.
a fallen body. So yes, it's about being born again spiritually, but being born again also has a physical aspect to it. Okay, that's why Yahusha says you have to be born from heaven. If you think about it, right? In the resurrection, Yahuwah is giving us new bodies that are stored up in heaven, being born from heaven, taking on new resurrected bodies. Okay, First Thessalonians 4:13 to 17, I think, also talks about the resurrection as well. So I might just read that as the last one here before we call it a day here with this study. First Thessalonians 4:13 to 17. But I will that you're not ignorant, brothers, concerning those who have fallen asleep, that you do not be grieved, even as others who have no expectation. For if we believe that Yahusha died and rose again in the exact same way, also those who have fallen asleep in Yahusha will Yahuwah bring with him. For this we say to you by the word of Yahuwah, that we who are alive and remain unto the coming of the Master shall no wise precede those who have fallen asleep, because Yahuwah himself shall descend from heaven with the shout of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of Yahuwah, and the dead in Messiah shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up with them to the air, so that we will always be with the Master, with Yahuwah. So, and a lot of people misunderstand that. I've seen that in the world. A lot of people think that verse means that the angel's blowing the trumpet, that Michael's blowing the trumpet. It doesn't say that. It says the voice of the archangel, like the voice means like you're speaking, you're calling out. But as far as the trumpet, it's also called in other places the trumpet of Yahuwah. Yahusha is the one blowing the trumpet. So a lot of people have like presumed that Michael's the one blowing the trumpet, where if you look at other cross references, he's not the one blowing the trumpet. So that's where it gets kind of confused and kind of juggled together, because it's like all in one verse there. So that, because it literally says here, let's see here. So, because Yahuwah shall descend from heaven with a shout of a command, with the voice of an arch messenger, and with the trumpet of Yahuwah, and the dead in Messiah shall rise first. So yeah, it's very confusing in that verse, because you have all that jumbled together almost in like one sentence. So yeah, but I personally believe the verse is actually saying that the arch messenger Michael, he's going to be calling out as Yahusha's returning, but the actual trumpet is Yahusha's is the one that's actually blowing the trumpet. And I think there's other cross references to prove that. I think you can go to First Thessalonians 3:12. I think mentions it. Yeah. So that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. But anyway, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this study. Hopefully it was edifying. And until next time, have a great rest of the week of Matzah, everyone. All the brothers and sisters out there, have a great rest of your feast season in Yahuwah and in Yahusha. And see y'all next time. Shabbat Shalom.